Hilary, if I could start with you, do you think there's an argument for axing private schools?
Yeah, I do. I have to say it's probably the only thing I've ever agreed with Jeremy Corbyn about, but I do think that they are just unfair. I think 7% of kids go to private schools, and yet the statistic is that for every £6 spent on education, £1 goes into the private sector. So that's 1 out of £6. So they're getting much, much more of the money than any of the state schools are. And that means that they can pay for lots more teachers, they can get the best teachers, they can get the best equipment, they can have the best facilities, and it's just totally unfair. And it's making the divide in society bigger and bigger. And as private schools get more and more expensive, which I think they have done, that polarization is growing even more. You know, my daughter goes to a state school. They can no longer have after school clubs because they can't afford them anymore, and the parents can't afford to pay for them. They've got no funding. State schools are having their funding cut all the time, and private schools have, you know, loads of money to do whatever they like. That cannot be fair. That cannot create an equal society.
Brendan Clark-Smith, you're a former teacher and former head teacher as well. If you axed private schools, state schools would get far better.
Yeah, and I think this is a completely false argument, Mark. I mean, I sometimes wonder if Diane Abbott's done the maths there. They talk about 1.7 billion. Of course, private schools save the state sector about 3.5 billion and also pay about 4.1 billion in tax as it is. There's 600,000 children that use independent schools at the moment. They'd all have to go somewhere as well. And I think that this really prejudiced idea about independent schools, that they're all these very big, grand things where you train to be a wizard or something. And at the end of the day, you know, they run specialist schools for people with educational needs that the state can't necessarily provide. A lot of these schools are actually very small schools. They have very tight budgets and so on. So if you actually took them away, I think you'd really be losing something, and it wouldn't make the state schools any better. All it would do is take away choice.
Chris McGovern, what's your view? You're also a former head teacher as well, and you're the head of the Campaign for Real Education. What's your view on the private sector? Don't you think it sort of bleeds talent and resource away from state schools?
Well, I do think, as David Cameron told his party conference a few years ago, we have the worst social mobility rate in the developed world. So we do have social apartheid in our country, but we have it within the state sector rather more than within the private sector, because if you have money, you can buy a house in a good area. According to the Social Mobility Unit, which was run by Alan Milburn at the time, a Labour politician, you're 25 times more likely to go to an inadequate school if you're from a poor background. So we have apartheid, but it's in the state sector and depends on house prices. As far as the money goes, yes, there is more money going perhaps per head into state schools, but in private schools. But private schools, they're not quite as good as sometimes they're cracked up to be. And if you go over to some poorer countries, such as Vietnam and other countries, you'll find they spend about 10% of what we spend on our state school pupils, but they achieve far higher results. So it's not a question really of money. It's a question of how we teach the children. There are often very, very good private schools. They also are particularly good at extracurricular activities. They produce much of our Olympic team, for example. We don't want to destroy what's good. We want to level up. We don't level up by actually scrapping state schools. We level up by raising the quality of state schools and also getting rid of the disastrous social apartheid which is in the state sector, and it's far more serious in the state sector. No one ever mentions it. If you've got money, you buy a house in a good area. If we were to close down private schools, the private school parents would buy houses in the good area, so-called good areas. So the poor would still suffer. We need to improve the quality of teaching. There's no excuse for children failing in our schools. Go to some of these poorer countries, Vietnam I gave, but there are others, do far better than us, spend far less. Not about money, not about class, it's about quality of teaching, has been and always will be about that.
Brendan Clark-Smith, you are a huge rising talent within Parliament. You're a Red Wall Tory, a man of the people. You don't sound like you went to Eton. Surely you're the best advert for axing these unequal institutions.
You're far too kind, Mark, I must say. Yeah, so bog standard comp, as we'd say, but I actually quite like my comp.
Shining example,
they did a good
Brendan.
job.
You're a great advert for your school. What about Margaret Thatcher? Is Margaret Thatcher a political hero of yours, Brendan?
She may be. Yeah, she may be.
Grammar school
may have
educated.
the odd
Grammar
picture
school
around.
educated. What about Kenneth Clarke? Edward Heath, some of the great Tory leaders, chancellors, cabinet ministers came from grammar schools.
They did, yeah. But I mean, we've had prime ministers coming from all over the place, and if you look at the cabinet as well, there's a mix. But people talk about private schools. If you target private schools, where's next? People were against the academies program. Some people are against church schools as well. You scrap all of those as well. Where do you actually stop? I give an example of where I am, Mark. Biggest town in my constituency in Bassetlaw is Worksop. Now we have Worksop College, which is a very established, excellent independent school, a fee-paying school. And then next to that, in the town, you'd say, does that mean that state pupils get a worse education? Well, no, because we've used the academy system and we have two outstanding schools there. So would they get a better education if the private school wasn't there? No. But what would happen is you'd have a lot more people trying to get to those academies, and your child's less likely to get a place. So I think everybody has a place in this system, and you scrap private schools, where does it end?
I would have thought, though, Chris McGovern, that the pushy parent factor would be significant. If we didn't have private schools, all of those ambitious middle-class families would have their kids at the state comprehensive, and they would be pressurising the head teacher and the staff to deliver for their children.
Well, yes, the pushy parents are always pushed through. But as I said earlier, a lot of pushy parents are in the state sector, and they are buying houses next to good schools. The pushy parents are always... We do need to worry and be concerned about the number of children who are failing, particularly as a result of the lockdown and the pandemic. Look, we are suffering as a society from the poor quality of our education system. It isn't good enough. You know, just to put this thing in perspective, we go on about this, how great these private schools are. And look, I was the head of a private school and I also worked in the state sector, but there are some great schools in the private sector. But according to the OECD, the number crunchers internationally, if you look at our math standards, well, the math standards of the street cleaner in Shanghai is ahead of our average and our best private schools. That's where we really are. So we need to look at educational standards. It is inexcusable. And it's really shameful that we have so many children in this country who are failing. Now, forget about the private school, state school. We want to raise standards. We don't want to dumb them down. So we've got to come back to this question of quality of teaching. Yeah, I suppose you could say parents in the private sector might push the schools a bit more to raise their standards. They shouldn't need pushing, for heaven's sake. We're talking about children here. They get one chance in life. They go to school. We've got to improve how we teach. And that means a revolution in the curriculum, but also a revolution in teaching methods, getting away from this trendy child-centred method that doesn't work and going back to we consider to be an old-fashioned method, but it isn't old-fashioned in Singapore. And that's teacher-led teaching. So we've got to change the way we teach and make sure we use methods that work. Then you can forget about private schools. Private schools would have withered on the vine 30 years ago had we not got rid of grammar schools. There wouldn't be many private schools around.
I think that's a really fair point.
If there are good state schools around, you wouldn't have private schools.
Bravo. We actually, Caroline, can we create a sort of klaxon of applause for the show? Because I really agree with what you've said there, Chris. I think that so many people watching the show who possibly stretch themselves financially, borrow money to privately educate their kids, wouldn't do so if they thought the local state school was satisfactory. And I think that's a really, really fair point. Final thought on this from you, Hilary. The issue you've got is that perhaps if you started an educational system today from scratch, you wouldn't have private schools. But we are where we are, and some of these institutions are world-class, whether it's Westminster School, UCS, don't know why I've mentioned that one, Westminster, I've mentioned Eton, you name it, right? But we have the creme de la creme of secondary schools in this country. Many rich oligarchs and billionaires travel across the world to come and live in the UK because our private schools are so good. If you were to axe them, you would be removing these elite institutions.
Well, would that be such a terrible thing? You know, what are those elite institutions doing other than perpetuating all the problems we've already got and creating the governments that we have that we don't like, that we complain about? Maybe if we change the system, we would have a different kind of elite. We'd have an elite that's there on merit, not just on the fact that their parents were rich enough to send them to private school.
But do you want to close down an institution that achieves very high grades for its students? I mean, that ultimately is the ultimate factor, isn't it? Academic excellence. And if you had fewer or none of these schools, then we would be, I guess, less academically excellent in this country.
Well, we could still be academically excellent at the university level, but there'd be a lot of more children who would get into those universities. You know, there's a huge proportion of the children who go to, the students who go to Oxford. I think 40% of them are from private schools. So maybe if we didn't have private schools, there would be lots and lots of people that can't get to Oxford at the moment who could get to Oxford.
Final thoughts on this, Brendan Clark-Smith?
Well, I think we forget about some of the good work as well that independent schools do. They give about 450 million in bursaries. There's 11,500 partnerships they do. So schools locally to me, they go to do science lessons in local primary schools. They let people use the facilities. So, you know, they're not bad guys. They're part of the system. And the real thing is that we want an outstanding education for all children. And as already alluded to, that's really the key thing. And, you know, it's like you look at your house and your car. I'm not bothered about what my neighbour's doing, so long as I've done a good job for my own family, some people would say. And education's a similar thing. Let's concentrate on our own education and get an outstanding education for everybody first, instead of looking green with envy at places that are successful.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.